We are monitoring all the latest out of the Kim Potter trial as well. Opening arguments are slated to begin tomorrow. Let's go out now to Fox 9's Paul Bloom with the latest on this. Paul, good to see you. What are we going to expect in the court tomorrow?
Well, great question. Today was kind of an off day, Andrew, for the trial. They got their jury a little quicker than I think both sides expected. That wrapped up last week. Yesterday, they came into court for maybe an hour, a little less, to discuss some issues, including the all-important jury instructions. The judge will eventually read to the jury before they begin the deliberations. And then tomorrow morning, so they took today off, then tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Central Time, a trial that is live streamed, will be broadcast, cameras inside that courtroom tomorrow. We certainly expect opening statements from both sides, two very differing opinions on what happens in that body camera footage. We've all seen the minute or so that's been released publicly. Of course, Brooklyn Center police officer at the time, Kimberly Potter, a traffic stop. Daunte Wright jumps back into the car, apparently attempting to flee. Potter yells out, "Taser, taser, taser," thinking she has her taser and is about to tase Daunte Wright, but instead had pulled out her firearm and shot a single time. And Daunte Wright was killed at that scene. So tomorrow we would get to opening statements from both sides, and the state will begin presenting its case. Hard to say exactly how they are going to lay out their case. We know they have experts on training. We know they have experts on use of force. And we know there's an eyewitness in the passenger seat. Daunte Wright's a girlfriend of his. We would have to hear from early on, as well as Katie Wright, Daunte Wright's mother, who's been active in some of the protests that followed. She was on the phone with Daunte. Daunte called her from the telephone. She was at home. He told her he was being arrested, detained. She heard the scuffle. And in fact, the girlfriend eventually called, or they connected again on phone via FaceTime. And Katie Wright saw her son dying in the driver's seat after that shooting. So we expect to hear early on from Katie Wright. So that would bring some of the emotion right into this courtroom. So just some things to think about as we look ahead to tomorrow morning.
You know, Paul, just to remind our viewers, and you've been following this from the very beginning, but this all happened, in broad daylight, in the middle of the street. It led to pretty raucous and violent protests there in Brooklyn Center. And this all happened amid the trial of Derek Chauvin. While that was going on not too far away, are we expecting to hear from Brooklyn Center police? Are they going to be called to the stand at all? We know she was a former member of the force. Will we be getting statements from them?
Yeah, I mean, we certainly expect to. And Andrew, just to clarify, 10, 12 miles away from the Hennepin County Government Center where Derek Chauvin was on trial, where the world's attention was focused on his murder of George Floyd, all of a sudden, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, there is this traffic stop, and Daunte Wright is killed. So yeah, there was several days of rioting, looting, protesting in the streets, and Brooklyn Center still continues to grapple with the fallout as it relates to its police department, including some feisty recent city council meetings on police budgeting. But in terms of witnesses, absolutely. I mean, of course, Kimberly Potter was there as a training officer. There were 2 officers at the scene with her. You would expect either side to call them. What did they see? What did they do? What was going on at the scene? The former Brooklyn Center police chief, of course, making the decision the next day to release that body camera footage publicly. He went against the wishes of the investigating state agency and put that video out there. He believes it was a mistake, that Kimberly Potter, well trained in that moment, heat of the moment, meant to pull out her taser, instead pulling out her firearm. Tim Gannon, he recently sat down with an exclusive interview locally with one of my colleagues here at Fox 9. We expect to hear from him. He is listed as a defense witness, but absolutely, I would think you'd expect to hear from several people connected to that police department, perhaps those responsible for training the officers. What kind of training did Kimberly Potter get in terms of telling her gun from her taser, where on the belt the taser and the gun sit? So all of those things I think would be in play, and certainly expect to hear from some personnel from the Brooklyn Center Police Department.
Paul, just last question for you. Kind of go into the charges, their manslaughter charges. What type of sentence does that carry? And also just to remind viewers, too, she was let go. She was fired from the force quite quickly after this happened.
Well, it ended up being a resignation. You may remember the community was demanding that she be fired, and that was one of the issues Brooklyn Center was grappling with, was this idea that, you know, the community, some of the activists and then the folks that were fighting for justice for George Floyd immediately demanded her firing. Some in city leadership, including the police chief, sort of was talking due process. Let's let this whole thing play out. So she wasn't terminated. She resigned, as did the police chief, and there's some new leadership in place under the mayor's direction there. So again, some of the fallout from the situation. And now I'm forgetting the question you asked. Remind me, Andrew, one more time what that question was.
No worries, Paul. I was just asking about what type of sentencing, if she's convicted on these charges, and the charges, the nature of them themselves.
Yeah, thanks for reminding me. So 2 counts here. She's facing a manslaughter in the first degree, a manslaughter in the second degree. In Minnesota, the first degree manslaughter involves a recklessness, handling her firearm recklessly. If convicted on that highest charge, probably looking something more closer to a 10-year prison sentence based on somebody who doesn't have a criminal record. And then on the manslaughter in the second degree, involving culpable negligence and creating sort of a dangerous situation that it could be believed would lead to somebody's death, more looking in that 4-year window should she be convicted against somebody without a criminal record. So a big difference between the man 1 and man 2 counts, but both counts are on the table here, and a jury will eventually have to make this decision, a jury that was seated last week, and we talked about it as 7 men, 7 women, and mostly white. It's not quite as diverse a panel as we saw at the trial of Derek Chauvin just several months ago now.
All right, Fox 9's Paul Bloom, we thank you for your reporting. We'll be following this trial alongside you. We'll speak to you again.
You bet. Thanks, Andrew.
We're going to continue this conversation, though. We do want to replay for you a conversation my colleague Christy Larson has with our legal analyst Ben Taylor, going into the specifics of what to expect in opening arguments tomorrow. Will Kim Potter take the stand in her own defense, the charges she is facing, and what this means for the community? Here's that conversation.
Here too, live now from Fox. There is a look at Kim Potter. She is the ex-Minnesota officer who is charged in the death of Daunte Wright. Now, her trial will begin this week. Tomorrow, this will have opening statements, and we, of course, wanted to talk ahead of these opening statements about everything surrounding this case. Now, both attorneys have their opening statements ready to go, as one side will argue that she was mistakenly grabbed her gun instead of her taser while she had fatally shot Wright. But prosecutors are going to say Potter was reckless and negligent and should go to prison. What we want to do is, of course, break it all down with you with one of our legal experts, Ben Taylor, who's been on here with us multiple times on Live Now from Fox. So thank you, Ben, for being here again. And let's just talk a little bit about this case. She is facing 2 charges. One is first-degree manslaughter. The other is second-degree manslaughter. What are kind of some of your thoughts going into tomorrow?
I mean, this is a very interesting case because you have a police officer who has been on the duty for many, many years, and who was a training officer at the time. And now she's a former officer. So it's going to come down to, like you discussed, Christy, whether or not does the jury believe that by accident, was it an accident? And if they find it an accident, they might find her not guilty. Or do they believe that she should have known better? She should have known that the taser wasn't a taser, but it was really a gun. And if they find that, they might find her guilty, or a hung jury. So this is a very interesting case because you have a police officer who pretty much has been on duty for many years, who's a training officer. And was it an easy mistake, or did she really know, or should have known, that the weapon that she grabbed was a gun instead of a taser?
You know, a lot of discussion surrounding that same topic happened right after this incident. This did take place back on April 11th. This also going on while the Derek Chauvin trial was going on in Minneapolis. Of course, a lot of people know that that officer obviously had been charged. And so we were in the middle of that trial when this incident happened. The discussion about the weight of the taser versus the gun, will that be brought up then into the courtroom? As again, you said she's an experienced officer. Usually they wear their belt. They have everything in the same places. Is that going to be something we're going to hear from teams who are questioning what happened exactly that day?
Yes. you're going to have the prosecutor's job is to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that this officer should have known and should have known better and acted in basically negligence or was reckless in handling this weapon of a gun instead of a taser. So that's what this prosecutor is going to try to prove and show the jury that Kim Potter should have known better. She should have realized that, and she shouldn't even pull the trigger, and she should know the difference between a gun versus a taser. Of course, the defense attorney is going to go up there and talk about her experience. You're going to hear about how she's a well-trained officer, how a lot of people have respected her over the years, and that this was an innocent mistake. Unfortunately, somebody died. Daunte Wright was the man who died. However, this is an innocent mistake, and this is what you're going to hear from the defense attorneys. So it's going to be very interesting because you're going to have a juror of 12 people. We're going to listen to all the evidence tomorrow, and opening statements are very key because this is the first time these jurors are going to hear pretty much the outline of the case. So they've heard a little bit about the case. They've probably seen some stuff in the media, but this is the first time they'll hear from the attorneys. So you want to, as an attorney, either the prosecutor or the defense, you want to make sure that these jurors are awake. You want to come out strong, and you want to make sure that your points are well articulated. So that way, these jurors in the beginning of the trial, which is one of the most important parts of the trial, will remember your statements throughout the rest of the trial when they hear testimony.
Now, that's something I want to touch on, Ben, since you're obviously a person who's been inside of these courtrooms. You just touched on something I wanted to ask you about. This obviously has been a story that has been in the news media ever since the incident happened. So how do you handle that going into these opening statements? Because there's probably been some different things that these jury members have read, and they want to make sure to get their storyline through and straight. And as you said, make it memorable as well.
Yes, and that's why they're going to rely on the judge, too, to make sure that these jurors are fair and impartial, that no matter what they heard or read about or people have talked about right there in Minnesota throughout the last year for this case, that they're not influenced, that they're supposed to be influenced only by what they hear in the courtroom and the evidence and testimony that's presented. So that's the only thing they can do is to judge the trial. I mean, this is a high-profile trial once again. And these are trials that have happened, months and months afterwards. And we've had another high-profile trial, Derek Chauvin, earlier this year. So, I mean, it's going to be interesting to see these jurors and what they're going to do in this case. Because this is a very different case, and the fact that this is something that the defense can easily argue is an honest, innocent mistake, and the prosecutor is going to argue that this was reckless. This was negligence, and the officer should have known better. So these jurors, it's going to be up to them ultimately. So they pick the jurors, that they've been picking them for the past couple of days. And that's the most important part of the case, is making sure that the jurors understand your point, because these are the people who are going to decide either not guilty or guilty at the end of the day.
And I want to just touch on, since we're talking about the Derek Chauvin trial, obviously video evidence played a huge part in that. You saw the officer kneeling on the neck of George Floyd. You saw him with handcuffs behind his back. This, again, is going to be another instance where we have video evidence. And so I want to talk about, you do see, though, pretty shocked expression on Kim Potter's face after she had shot Daunte Wright. Now, will that play any part into the courtroom? Obviously, that video will probably be shown a number of times to these jury members.
The jurors are going to rely upon that video. That video is going to be key evidence, because that's what happened that same day when Daunte Wright was pulled over for the traffic stop. So the jurors are going to be looking into Daunte Wright's actions. They're going to be looking into Kim Potter's actions and reactions, and they're going to base their whole case mainly upon the video. Of course, you're going to have other people testify and other people talk about the incident, but the videos, as we always talk about, witnesses can lie, attorneys can even exaggerate or even lie, but at the end of the day, the jurors look at the video and they're smart. They use their own common sense, and they're going to look at this video and decide whether or not Kim Potter, at the time of that day of the traffic stop, whether or not she was guilty or not guilty, whether or not she knew that this weapon was either a taser or a gun that could killed Daunte Wright. So it's going to be interesting. But yes, the key evidence in this whole case will be that video. And you might hear the jurors even ask to see the video again. And when we get to deliberations, you might see the jurors ask, can we have the video played again? Can we hear everything? Can we break it down? Because that's what they're going to decide this whole case about.
So speaking of deliberations, what would they have to kind of be proven in the courtroom? What would the jury really need shown to them for a full acquittal to happen? Because that could be one of the outcomes, or we could just find her guilty on both of the charges against her.
This case can even be a hung jury too. Mm-hmm. So it can be guilty, not guilty, or the jurors can't even decide, because all 12 of them have to be unanimous. All 12 of them have to decide whether or not Kim Potter is guilty or not guilty. So they all have to talk, they all have to listen to the evidence, and they all have to discuss amongst themselves. And basically, at the end of the day, they have to come up with a decision. All 12 of them. If all 12 of them can't decide, say it's 6 and 6, 6 say not guilty, 6 say guilty, that means you have a hung jury, and you might have to do the whole trial over again. So once they hear all the evidence, and we understand that Kim Potter might even testify herself. And that's going to be a key element in this case. If she takes the stand and testify, the jurors are going to want to know what was going through her head at the time. And if she articulates it correctly and they believe her, they might find her not guilty. But if they don't believe her, they can find her guilty. So it's going to be interesting in the next couple of weeks to see, what Kim Potter does and the other evidence and other witnesses. But the key element will be the video, and the key element will be whether or not Kim Potter takes the stand and testifies in her own defense.
Now, we did have both the prosecution defense teams. They were in the courtroom yesterday, taking a break today, opening statements scheduled for tomorrow. So yesterday, they had some motions regarding on some of the character evidence for Potter. They also had talked about the autopsy photos being shown during the trial. This, of course, is going to be a broadcasted trial. So I just want to touch on some of those proceedings that happen ahead of what a lot of people tune in for. How important is it for your side to get to the judge to sway your way when it comes to some of the rulings on these issues ahead of the trial?
So attorneys, we work on these cases months and months and even years in advance. And before the trial even starts, and the jurors not even in the room, attorneys, they present what you call pretrial motions because you want the judge to rule in your favor. And there's certain character evidence of Kim Potter as a defense attorney. You want the jurors to hear that because the jurors may feel some way towards Kim Potter, and if they like her, they might find her not guilty. But the judge says, defense attorney, we're going to throw out your motion and we're not going to grant your motion. That hurts your case. Same with the prosecutor. The prosecutor wants to get in evidence that Kim Potter should have known that this was a weapon. So before the jurors even get seated, attorneys, they argue over pretrial motions, and at the end of the day, if your motion gets granted, that helps start the trial in the right direction because that means you're allowed to present certain evidence that's helpful to your case. And you always want to have the jurors hear helpful evidence. So these are very important motions. The jurors don't hear about them. At the end of the day, the judge rules, the judge decides what motions, which evidence actually will the jurors be allowed to hear. And if you're the prosecutor or the defense attorney, you definitely want those motions to be granted in your favor to make sure that the jurors hear the evidence that you want them to hear in order to win your case.
And finally, Ben, since we have you, I just want to ask about, you just mentioned, obviously these cases are built up months and months in advance to prepare yourself for these trials, especially one like this that definitely has grabbed the nation's attention. Does that have any effect on what's presented in the courtroom? Of course, we know that there is going to be a lot of people tuning in from groups on both sides of the issue, especially as this was a white ex-police officer, and it's a black man who unfortunately lost his life. So does that play a part when these attorneys are getting ready and prepared?
Yes, the attorneys pay attention to the media. They pay attention to the papers. They want to make sure that these jurors are not influenced by anything. So you might even hear of a motion to exclude certain people outside of the courtroom because you don't want somebody famous or somebody influential to come in and sit in the gallery And the jurors can see, well, we have this famous person. Are they there for the prosecutor? Are they there for the defense? Because that can easily persuade and influence jurors. Jurors are human beings. They're regular people. And if they see somebody famous in the courtroom, that's why some of the times those motions are there to preclude and exclude certain people from the courtroom and certain evidence, because you want the jurors at the end of the day to base the facts and the evidence, and at the end of the day rule based upon what they hear in the courtroom, not because of outside influences at all.
Months of preparation all comes down to Wednesday's opening statements, and we do appreciate you helping break it all down, of course, for us. Again, Ben Taylor joining us here on Live Now from Fox.